Muslims claim that death is final for the carcasses of cows, sheep and birds. Why should we mention Allah's name when slaughtering animals in order for them to be eaten? Does the speechless animal, which is about to die, understand Arabic or any other language? They also say that we, the people of the East, are overly superstitious, and that we do not understand, nor do we have knowledge about a great many things. What is the use of mentioning the name of Allah over the carcass which suffers the pain of slaughtering, since it has no consciousness or understanding? Is pronouncing the name of Allah over the dead body no more than a religious ceremony or ritual? Has it a great effect? And is there a strict scientific basis or rule on which this is based? First, let us turn to individuals. Let us obtain some opinions and viewpoints concerning the importance of this practice of using Allah's name when slaughtering animals.
I eat it when I know that the words Allah is greater were pronounced over it, but I don't eat it when I know this didn't take place.
It's according to the intention. We shouldn't eat it if the butcher intentionally neglected to mention Allah's name, but if it was unintentional, then we can eat.
According to the religious view, it's necessary to do this, whilst according to the science, it's not.
There isn't a problem if man has forgot, but it would be forbidden if he had intended to neglect this.
There isn't any problem if he mentions the words Allah is greater to himself, but it's better if he pronounces it loudly. Since he has pronounced the words Allah is greater over the first carcass, it means he has the intention for all.
It's necessary to pronounce the words Allah is greater over each carcass, but if they were gathered in one place, he can slaughter the whole, pronouncing this word once over all of them.
Yet pronouncing the statement, in the name of God, Allah is greater over birds and cattle when they are slaughtered, is related to heavenly statutes and divine commands, which prophets and messengers have informed the people of, isn't it?
Yes, of course. Mentioning the name of Allah loudly over the carcasses when slaughtering is part of all heavenly religion. The people of Scripture do not eat that over which God's name was not pronounced, and this is also the way of Muslim believers. Since we are of one origin, our master Adam, so religions are also of one origin. The Quran refers to this when it says, "Mankind were one nation. No one was a denier of God's book, but there were some who were obedient, and others who were not. Then Allah sent forth His prophets to give good news to the obedient, and to warn the disobedient." The following verse reveals that religion has one origin, when God says, in Surah Shura, "He has ordained for you the religion He has revealed to you, Muhammad, and formally enjoined Noah and Abraham, Moses and Jesus, saying, establish the religion and be united in it." So the Quranic verses related to pronouncing the words Allah is greater are repeated 8 times. This evidently indicates that the matter is of great importance and seriousness. We have got to the worst time where pronouncing the statement, "In the name of God, Allah is greater," over the carcasses has disappeared due to negligence. People ignore the purpose and wisdom beyond their own aggrandizement. But God's will keeps on trying to restore the oblivious people to the true path. Therefore, the cry of the great scholar Muhammad Amin Sheikho sounds out of holy Damascus and spreads all over the world, inviting people to adhere to the practice of mentioning Allah's name when slaughtering animals. They must simply say, "Allah is greater," over each carcass. Then the miracles will happen. Today, we stand before the medical fact of pronouncing, "In the name of God, Allah is greater," over carcasses when slaughtering. It's mentioned in a unique scientific research project unveiled by a group of physicians. They have fought deadly germs through science, driving away the darkness of ignorance and superstition. They have also removed the ignorance that covered the legacy of the heavenly religions. The importance of pronouncing these words over the carcasses and the general ignorance about this impelled Professor Abdul Qadir al-Dairani to bring up this subject in a modern, scientific and academic light, showing the necessity of this practice to human society. He received his training from the humane scholar Muhammad Amin Sheikho, whose work on the Quran is published in his book Interpretation of the Great Quran. Therefore, Professor al-Dairani set out to talk to renowned scholars, professors and doctors specialized in this field. An agreement was made to perform comprehensive research to completely cover the subject.
We have held many medical meetings with doctors where I have told them that Muhammad Amin Sheikho had demonstrated a discovery useful for everyone, for us and our children, more than 40 years ago. Pronouncing the word Allah is greater over a carcass relaxes it and puts an end to its suffering from diseases, germs and bacteria.
Whenever a verse in the Quran mentioned carcasses, such as don't eat of that over which the name of Allah wasn't pronounced, Sheikho said to clarify for us that the carcass could be eaten only when this practice occurred, whereas if it wasn't, the carcass wouldn't be in a fit state to eat.
We have devised a schedule including all the points to be discussed and studied according to the latest modern scientific methods. An agenda has been arranged to study this case with its results and to ascertain scientifically an outcome that removes all doubts and ends all arguments. After the meeting of the scientific team, which approved the plan and the steps to take, the project began. First, the team began visiting slaughterhouses where the killing was performed in order to take samples of different meat, in order that various medical and scientific tests could be achieved. Then, they would be examined so as to show if any real effect of pronouncing the words, "In the name of God, Allah is greater," had occurred.
At the beginning, the research team were skeptical regarding this subject, but as soon as the primary results began to come in, they were astonished. They then acted with great interest, and the flood of surprise didn't stop during the remaining time of study and research. The results appeared to be incredible, but they were real.
Mentioning Allah's name had a discernible effect in sterilizing the meat, as well as releasing the blood. On the contrary, the meat over which the words hadn't been pronounced was full of germs and congested with blood.
At first, it was impossible for man to imagine that this statement, "In the name of God, Allah is greater," had such an effect. But when the scientific team saw the findings and the results of the laboratory analysis, we found it really was a matter deserving amazement and admiration. Actually, pronouncing the name of Allah over the carcass when slaughtering resulted in unexpected findings.
This study, which drew the attention of the medical team, is regarded as one of the first such studies in Syria. In fact, it's one of the first such studies in the whole world. The researchers followed the most advanced medical and scientific methods adopted in the most developed international academies for studying the effect of this statement over the carcasses of animals.
We've executed a scientific germ study on a sample of calf meat slaughtered according to God's statute, i.e., pronouncing the statement, "In the name of God, Allah is greater," and on a sample of meat which did not have this done. We also performed another germ study on a chicken slaughtered whilst mentioning the statement, and on another without this happening. small pieces of the samples according to the technique and placed each one in a mixture of 10% Dettol solution, so as to sterilize the whole surface and avoid the accusation that microbiological pollution had resulted from germs surrounding the surface. After an hour of soaking, we took these samples of the calf and chicken and placed them in a thioglycolate solution. The first event of note was that there was no observable microbiological growth at all in any of the meat pieces over which the divine state had been pronounced, so that the solution appeared disinfected and clear. As for the chicken and the calf slaughtered without the statement, a significant increase in germs was seen in the thioglycolate solution, which seemed to be turbid. After 24 hours, we removed some of these cultures and place them in 3 solid culture solutions. After 48 hours, it was noticed that the cultures, which contained the samples on which Allah's name had been pronounced, were completely sterilized. That is, they had a sterility of more than 99%. As for the samples over which the divine statement was not mentioned, a great abundance of microbiological growth could be seen.
First, we noticed on the blood-based agar solution a great growth in germs, especially the staphylococcus, which dissolves the blood in addition to the streptococcus, which also performs this function, and many other kinds of gram-positive cocci. We also noticed in the second solution a great increase in gram-negative bacteria, such as the E. coli, bacilli, and E. coli, as well as
there was a significant increase in the solution of EMB. As for the samples on which Allah's name was mentioned, there was no noticeable microbiological growth at all, neither in the blood-based agar solution, nor in the EMB solution or nutritive agar solution.
With the unaided eye, there was a noticeable difference between the meat over which Allah's name had been pronounced and the other samples concerning their color. The first was of a light rose hue, whilst the other was a dark bluish red. These are tisular plaques related to sections of cow meat. This is the meat over which the words Allah is greater was pronounced. It was kept tisularly in profile plaques. This is the flesh over which the statement was not mentioned. There are other plaques of bird flesh. The one pointed at is the meat over which the divine statement had been said. Its color is light and clear, whereas the meat over which these words had not been said is a darker color than the first. This is a tisular section under the microscope. The one on the right is cow meat over which Allah's name was pronounced. It's noticed that no phlogistic cells were found in it, and there are only a few red cells. This section belongs to the meat over which the statement was not said. There are phlogistic cells and a large number of red cells. This is a section of chicken meat over which the statement had been said. We can see in this picture the rarity of the phlogistic white cells and red cells in comparison with the tissue of the meat over which such words had not been pronounced.
Thus, we conclude that the effect of pronouncing Allah is greater is miraculous, and this reality will cause scientific astonishment. How does this carcass over which the words were said have meat that is sterilized, whereas the blood of the carcass over which Allah's name wasn't said remains within, so that in most cases this flesh is clearly and obviously full of germs?
The findings were more than amazing. They even surprised the researchers themselves, who never expected that the effect of this simple statement, Allah is greater, would be on such a wide and important level. All the blood and tisular tests were in favor of the divine statement. The meat over which Allah is greater was pronounced was pure, clean of any pollution and any mark of blood blotches, germs, or microbe colonies. As regards the meat over which the statement had not been said, following the blood and tisular tests, and with the displayed pictures, we can see the samples were infected and polluted to an extreme extent that cannot be neglected or disregarded. We had to put this to the test, for testing is the most potent proof of what we say. We have the tisular sections and the anatomical sections, as well as the laboratory and blood analysis, which proves that there is a great difference between the meat over which the words Allah is greater were pronounced and the meat over which it was not. Then, since we live in an age where people don't accept anything except after placing it in tests and obtaining evidence and proof, so we can practically say that we may now know the truthfulness of this strange phenomenon. All of you and all mankind feel astonished at the significant difference between the samples over which the words Allah is greater were pronounced and those over which it was not. As soon as the team of the medical and laboratory research had declared these amazing findings, the media began to pay attention to this unprecedented medical discovery. London Radio was the first station to transmit and broadcast this news. Here is a part of what was transmitted, as declared by the research team.
Reading and hearing about the enormous cry raised by the humane scholar Muhammad Amin Sheikhu, signs spread all over the streets calling the Syrian people to check the sources of the meat they eat and the way in which the animals were slaughtered. Our newswoman in Damascus, Salwa al-Istuwani, saw these signs and sent us the following message.
These words were written on large notices covering the streets and published through tapes so as to spread the news of a medical discovery based on God's wisdom. The Damascene scholar Muhammad Amin Sheikhu was the first to draw attention to the situation as modern life began to diminish certain characteristics of Islam. His medical discovery concerns the way of slaughtering animals, which can be eaten after pronouncing the statement, Allah is greater, at the moment of slaughtering.
A French station has transmitted the findings of this discovery in French to the countries of the European Union. This caused the largest center for chicken slaughtering in the French city of Toulouse to take up these findings and employ a man to pronounce the name of Allah over each carcass to be slaughtered there.
The news of this exciting discovery spread through all news agencies, newspapers, as well as local, Arabic and international magazines. In addition, Arabic and international satellite stations had interviews with Abdul Qadir al-Dairani and the members of the medical team, which shed further light on their findings. The researchers published their results in a book dedicated to Muhammad Amin Sheikhu, under the title of Allah is Greater, Be Kind to Animals. A man may ask, how can an abstract group of words cause a tangible effect that is both noticeable and practical? What is the secret hidden beyond the words, Allah is greater, so that it makes the meat of carcasses sterilized and free of blood? I say, in our world, when the Almighty God offered His trust to all spirits, as the noble Quran indicates, when it says, we offered the trust to the heavens, earth and mountains, and they refused to bear it. Why did they refuse? For they feared it. They feared to fail, and then the fire of sorrow, regret, and loss would flame inside them. Man bore it, he said. O Provider, it is mine. At that time, the universe and all the creatures in it accepted to be subject and servant to man, especially the cattle and birds, which chose to sacrifice their bodies for man, who had undertaken to bear the trust of God. So to be grateful for this great sacrifice, man should return charity for charity by pronouncing the name of his Provider loudly, when slaughtering these animals, so as to give them a lift, elevating them from their spiritual worldly bliss to a more exalted and sublime one. The Almighty says in the Al-Hajj Surah, so as to pronounce the name of Allah over the animals which He has granted them.
Allahu Akbar.
In fact, when they put off their physical garment, their veil will be removed, and they will be abstract spirits, all of which are merely sounds, tastes, and feelings. They will understand the words, Allah is greater, in any language of the world. So, when pronouncing in the name of God, Allah is greater, their spirits will fly as a ray up to their Creator, full of happiness and everlasting delight, when looking at the Creator of beauty and origin. They will be pleased with His overwhelming generosity, and God will be pleased with them, for they have sacrificed their bodies for man, who is honored by Allah. They shake and tremble as they become flooded by the seas of bright light which He bestows on their bodies, making their blood flow out in plentiful amounts, and through which any damage is released from their bodies. God says, eat of that over which the name of Allah was pronounced.
Some people think that drugging the animal, electrocuting it, or making them unconscious by gas before slaughter protects them from convulsions, contractions, and the pain of dying. They claim that there are many ways of being kind to animals, whilst the Islamic method has no humanity.
Concerning the Islamic method of slaughter and the other ways which are not Islamic, the English scholar Sonton studied them and gave lectures on this subject at Cairo University in 1956. He said that the slaughter that is not Islamic increases the blood pressure of the carcass from 14 to 28, double the normal pressure. This tires the brain and torments the animal, although Westerners keep emphasizing that no concussion or contractions take place that may alienate the spirit and cause great anxiety for the animal. In contrast, the Islamic method relaxes the carcass and lessens the blood pressure from 14 to 0. Thereafter, all the blood is released from the carcass due to the body's natural contractions, and this results in the rose color.
Some Orientalists claim that the Islamic way of slaughter is inhumane. They provide the evidence of contractions and convulsions that the animal suffers when being killed. In fact, it's absolutely the opposite. If the Islamic method is performed correctly, it prevents the blood and air from reaching the brain. Thus, the animal becomes completely unconscious and loses all feeling. The convulsions that occur are but reflex actions which rid the carcass of all the blood it contains.
The effect of pronouncing the words, in the name of God, Allah is greater, over the carcass, is not confined to the purity and clarity of the meat. There is also an effect on changing the spiritual climate in the slaughterhouse from a state of misery and unhappiness to a state of pleasure and ease. This is what directors and workers in cattle and fowl slaughterhouses have confirmed.
Regarding slaughter, when performing it, we noticed that the amount of blood increases so much more when mentioning the words Allah is greater. Besides, when we do not pronounce the words, the animals are anxious and become agitated. They are much more comfortable when we pronounce the words.
They pronounce the words Allah is greater loudly over each carcass when they slaughter it. It was noticed that when doing this, the animal bleeds more and its meat is much lighter. In contrast, if these words are not said, the animal does not bleed enough and its flesh becomes rotten much more easily and in a much shorter period of time.
I was working in one of the largest slaughterhouses in Syria. When the findings of the research appeared, we soon began to apply them in the place where we work. We were surprised because we had faced a lot of trouble when driving the animals into the slaughter hall. After applying this act, we saw the animals entering the hall easily.
When we went to the slaughterhouse in order to see how the slaughtering acts were performed, we found that the animals which were being driven to be killed were coming submissively as if they were yielding to the fate which Allah had created for them. They were surrendering themselves, and the blood was flowing out of them cleanly and in great amounts.
When pronouncing the name of Allah, the slaughter is performed with godliness, calm, and humanity. All the workers remember that the name of Allah prevails over everything. So, in this submissive atmosphere, the carcass is affected as little as possible in losing its soul. Consequently, the quality of the muscles made ready for eating are completely undamaged, and the amount of the bleeding is so plentiful that the amount of germs is minimal. Therefore, the food for these carcasses relieves a great deal of anxiety from the consumer. In my opinion, the studies performed by the medical team on the effect of pronouncing the name of Allah on a carcass has proved that this meat is completely free of microbes and resulting quality is very high.
It was proved that the negligence of pronouncing the name of Allah over a carcass made its meat a focus of blood filled with microbes. So what is the opinion of doctors and specialists about the presence of this blood and these microbes within the tissue of the meat? What is the extent of their effect on public health?
عندما كنت في الخارج أثناء سنين دراستي رأيت بأم عيني كيف يتماثل.
During the years of my studies abroad, I noticed how the patients really improved when they stopped eating meat. The main reason I gave for this was that this meat was not slaughtered according to Islamic custom. In other words, it had been slaughtered in another fashion. And after revealing the great importance of pronouncing the words Allah is greater over a carcass in preventing blood from remaining in the animal and the consequent growth of microbes, it has become clear that this is very much the cause. So the meat which people stopped eating appeared to be similar to the meat over which the words Allah is greater had not been said, and in which microbe reproduction had increased to the extent that the amount of toxins and enzymes secreted by germs was considerable. Thus, this meat was the reason for the problems and not the cure for them. The damage caused by Staphylococcus to the body is dangerous. They can cause severe infections when attacking the skin, nose, ear and throat, and the death rate may reach 20%, especially amongst patients who suffer immunodeficiency. They may also cause food poisoning, as some of these toxins secreted by the microbes have a high ability to resist heat and pass through the mucous membrane to the stomach. They can reach the intestines, as well as pass through the stomach and enter the bloodstream, then reach all parts of the body. These toxins, secreted by the staphylococcus germs, are of a wide variety and have an ability to decompose the blood and cause toxicity in the white cells that defend the body from disease.
The Islamic way of slaughtering allows the animal to move freely and consequently bleed in a complete way. Other ways followed in Europe depend on making the animal lose consciousness before the slaughtering. This allows a great deal of blood to stay in the carcass, and this is a perfect environment for the multiplication of microbes. When this blood decomposes, it produces poisonous compounds that can prosper in a man's body. These compounds could be poisonous if they reach the stage of producing free amino acids. And generally the blood contains such simple nitrogen compounds. These acids may condense and produce further compounds that have a negative effect on a consumer's health.
إن التناول المتكرر للحوم الغير مكبر عليها له أثر تراكمي سلبي.
The recurrent eating of meat over which the words Allah is greater was not pronounced has an accumulative negative effect on a man's health. It appears to affect the epidermis, and indications of its effects are shown in early senility, amongst other results. That is what I noticed in the countries where I was studying.
Moreover, when the blood remains in the meat of the carcass over which the name of Allah wasn't pronounced, it makes it spotted and gives it a bad appearance. Consequently, people will lose business, and such carcasses also decay very quickly whilst being stored. This causes economic damage as well.
Since the blood is the medium for the growth of the microbes, which contains them even when the animal enjoys good health, it may be unable to resist their reproduction after slaughtering, as all antibiosis activity stops. This will surely cause the meat to decay in a short time, and this lack of quality will be reflected in the meat available for human consumption. If we leave the blood at normal temperature, it will decay within 3 or 4 hours. So, what will happen if it exists in an airless environment inside the muscular tissue? This will certainly cause the meat to rot quickly and not fit for human consumption. Consequently, it will be inedible according to all local and international standards.
A man may say, how about those who may eat the blood and carcass through necessity when fearing death?
The Almighty God legitimizes us to eat the meat of carrion, swine, and strangled animals in case of dire necessity. That is, when fearing death because of hunger. He, glory to His name, says in the Al-An'am Surah, "Why should you not eat that over which the name of Allah is pronounced, since He has made plain to you what is forbidden, except when you are constrained?"